Hello my fellow nurses, in this video we will be taking a look at the state of healers at the start of Dragonflight right before Season 1. This video will have a tier list and recommendations for people that mostly pug and aren't gonna try to do world first keys, break records, basically your average to a more semi-serious higher-end player, as I feel these are the type of people who will be looking at these videos and what my channel is for. At the end of the video, I'll have a tier list of my opinion and also a recommendation table that you can check out. I also want to say, unless you want to aim for the Mythic Plus title or hit rank 1, it genuinely doesn't matter what you play. There's really only one that I feel is unplayable, but even then it can be a bit overcome. With that being said, let's start seeing the state of healers. Let's start with my fellow shapeshifters. It had a pretty rough expansion in Shadowlands, with it being kind of in the middle in terms of rankings, talents changing all over the place, covenants, now it's over. Now in Dragonflight, everything changes. It is up there in terms of power. Resto Druid is in a very good spot due to it being very complete as a spec compared to its other healer mates. Damage wise, I never felt like I was shooting peas at my enemies and it felt very fluid and had impact. The addition of Skull Bash to the roster of abilities also make it a very strong contender for a Puck King. Healing wise, they also don't lack here, and I mean it. Flourish, Convoke, Adaptive Swarm. It's very hard to find a situation where you will feel overwhelmed as the Resto Druid in terms of damage intake onto your party. Utility wise, they're also insane. Mark of the World is back. A battle res that with Nature's Swiftness allows it to be cast instantly from range, a Stampeding Roar to make your party move faster, your Soul's Vortex for when your tank needs to kite, and again the list just goes on. It's very hard to say something bad about Resto Druid, just because it is a complete spec compared to the others. The only downsides that I see is it might struggle sometimes with massive amounts of burst damage at once, and the fact that it doesn't have a natural bloodlust, but these are just nitpicks at this point and will rarely affect you realistically. I initially thought Evoker would not be a strong pick, but the more you play it, the more you realize how strong it is. The damage this thing can do is absolutely nuts. Judging from my testing, it might be the #1 on the DPS charts, making the saying, offense is the best defense, pretty real in this case. Healing wise, I feel it is a bit under Resto Druid, but I also suspected that it is because I really didn't have enough time to really understand it to its fullest. It would amaze me if after a few weeks, some Evokers will be at the level of Resto Druid players simply because they finally have an environment where they will be able to be tested correctly. If the DPS meta skews towards melee DPS, I feel this spec will be super strong just because of its kit seeming like it loves to heal melees more than ranged. In terms of utility, they have a very interesting cauterizing flame that dispels absolutely everything. You can reposition teammates around, a natural bloodlust, and again, just like the Druid, the list can go on. Overall, an incredibly solid healing spec. Another expansion, another season, and also another moment where Holy Paladin finds a way to not become obsolete. This spec, as per usual, due to its kit, is very hard for it to fall down. One of the important things to keep in mind related to Holy Paladin is the fact that it has instant heals and damage reduction, basically what Mythic Plus likes. Blessing of Protection and Blessing of Sacrifice alongside Aura Mastery can borderline carry a fight filled with stupidity, and just the sheer flexibility of the spec is bonkers. Its survivability is also insane because of them keeping Divine Shield and just being a plate healer. A downside to all of this is that every time I played Holy Paladin, it required a very meticulous cooldown management and a mentality geared towards proactiveness, which a lot of healers don't evolve in their playtime usually. This was alleviated by Ashen last expansion, but with it gone, the Holy Paladins will need to change a bit their playstyle. Speaking of the removal of Ashen, I suspect that the Holy Paladin damage will also plummet, and it kind of did. If you focus on it, in my honest opinion, it is fine. Sure, it doesn't go up to the Evoker levels, but it's still there, and there are gonna be other specs down in this specific metric. Something to keep in mind, Holy Paladins now get a better res, allowing them to have a bit more looking for group leverage, as I like to call it, when it comes to applying to groups. Well, you can get better res with any healer, having it in your kit means you don't need to sacrifice a profession. Overall, I feel that people sleep a bit on Holy Paladin. Right now, at the start of the season, I don't think it will be the definitive best healer, but after a while, when people get more geared and the general healing requirements go lower, it can increase in value as the hierarchy goes, the less healing you usually need, and more damage reduction preferably. as sooner or later you will start predicting damage intakes. Holy Priest just feels the same. If you've played it before, then very little will actually change. If you're new to healing, then this is probably the spec you want to jump into at first, simply because there really aren't that many buttons to really be worried about, and it just works how the usual Joe thinks a healer should work. I initially wanted to put Holy Priest as the puck king, but I decided not to. Something to keep in mind is that the healing priest classes are the only healing specs to not receive an interrupt, which is vital when it comes to carrying pugs. It also doesn't bring a natural ballast or a battle res, which also doesn't help its case. It does bring PI, and its single target damage is good. Mindsoothe is also a great spell, but at the start of the season it will be useless as we don't know exactly yet what priests can soothe to help with skips. It's really hard to say a lot of things for Holy Priest as I don't think it's necessarily a bad spec, just not overloaded as the specs I spoke about so far. I do believe that Holy Priest is a very friendly healer to start with. You don't need to spend a lot of time fighting the spec, but you can spend it learning the healer role. A simple spec is not bad. It would allow you to improve on decision making and game sense, which will come in handy when swapping to another healer later on. Discipline is weird. I've had moments where I thought it is really good, or it is the absolute worst healer. It does more damage than before, sure, but the lack of utility is generally what killed my vibe with this spec, just like Holy Priest earlier. While I can get over the lack of utility, I also had moments where the disc healing just wasn't there. I would just say to myself that I would rather swap to Holy and call it a day. It's just one of those specs which I just cannot see it be optimal in Mythic Plus right now. Any buff to it would just propel it too hard in the rating tier list where it's already really good. If played correctly, it's still a very fatal spec, simply because of the ramp ups, where you basically keep your team alive throughout everything that isn't a one shot. But that cannot be done all the time. While looking through its talents, I did see Twins of the Sun Priestess there, which can realistically propel Discipline Priest to a higher spot if a DPS spec that benefits from PI is insanely broken. Overall, it's hard to say. I don't think it's a bad spec, but I'm also a firm believer that every priest has to know both specs, as some dungeons will simply require raw healing and some dungeons will require raw damage, and refusing to learn both of them is just keeping yourself incredibly hard, especially at the start when people are still making their minds what is good or bad. Every Mistweaver stand up because we're about to become Mistweavers tonight. My expectations were low coming into Mistweaver, but I was pleasantly surprised. Healing wise, I never thought they were bad. The issues with Mistweaver, realistically, was the mana hungry spells and the downright embarrassing damage numbers. Both of these in my testings were actually fixed to some extent. Very rarely I felt that I ran out of mana, it's just that when I really needed to pump big numbers, but it's in a way expected since you're kind of pushing your character to the max. In terms of damage, the issue remains single target DPS, but we're off to a good start since AoE numbers were fine. Honestly, the only issue that I realistically see with Mistweaver is just that it doesn't bring a natural bloodlust or a battle res, and its cooldowns are pretty bad, especially Revival. Chi is okay, Revival is not, but you can kind of overcome that with experience. Overall, it can carry pucks pretty hard in my opinion, if played correctly. It has a melee interrupt, so that's a 15-second cooldown, compared to Evoker's, 40-second? Ring of Peace can save your tank or stop patrols. Paralysis is also like a mini second interrupt if used correctly, and if no monk is in your party and the team is filled with physical damage, Mystic Touch is a really nice addition. Alright everyone, time to go on a rant. I left the best for the last, oh you guessed it. I am in absolute shambles with Resto Shaman. Only healer which I genuinely feel is borderline trash. I feel like the swap to the new talents just destroyed the spec and I don't even know where to start. The damage is insanely low post-Vesper era. It did get buffed, but that was because it was so bad that people had monk PTSD. The removal of Vesper, it was necessary and it comes from someone that mained the Resto Shaman, but I just cannot find a way how this can be fixed without another totem that does DPS is added. Healing wise, it feels bad. The Cloud Burst is there just for the lulz, alongside the overall healing nerf. A lot of the stuff Shaman had before is locked in my opinion in really awkward talent spots. It feels like someone who doesn't play Resto Shaman was forced to redo the spec, but while chopping parts off it. Not even sure what to say about the utility. The good thing is that they didn't lock the Bloodlust in an awkward talent spot as well, but I feel I actually gave them ideas now. Most of it is fine, it just requires you to spec into it, but also losing other important talents. Well, I never felt this with other healers. It's just bad. Like, I rarely say this, but I feel like this spec just shouldn't be touched if you are genuinely semi-serious. Its only saving grace is that it has a 12-second interrupt and a natural ballast, but that's about it. For the tier list, this is more for the memes, but this is kind of how I see the specs at the moment. S is really tough between Druid and Evoker, and I can't seem to really get a grasp as to which one is stronger. Paladin is in S tier just because I see it as a sleeper spec. A tier is really weird because I see all of them equal, but not as strong as the first three. Like, the order doesn't matter here unless one of them gets buffed or something. B tier was made just for Shaman because I genuinely felt that they're incredibly weak. As for recommendations and the part of the video which you should probably take a bit more seriously compared to the tier list, feel free to pause the video as there's a lot of info on the screen. I tried to really simplify it, but I couldn't really cover every possible question or whatever. Again, don't let tier lists really influence your mind. Feel free to play whatever you want, as I'm very sure any spec can achieve Keystone here at least. If you enjoyed the video, heal that like button, res that subscribe button, and throw a comment if I maybe missed something. Happy healing, my fellow nurses, and I hope this video helped you.